Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Jasmine Singer.
And this is Marianne Sullivan.
And this week, Marianne will be chatting with power couple Galina Hale and David Meyer about, among other things, food systems innovations, an organization which is dedicated to creating a more sustainable, humane, and equitable global food system while creating value for all stakeholders. We've been having a lot of power couples on lately. I like it.
Yeah, no, this is an amazing interview, and I really learned a lot. And what they're doing, Galina is a very sophisticated economist. As soon as I hear the word economist, I get scared because I never know what they're talking about. But she was very comprehensible, and they're really working at a high level of trying, to figure out how we're going to shift this monolithic food system to be more compassionate. They're dedicated vegans. I loved this interview, one that you don't want to miss.
Very exciting. Seems kind of different too. So I love that. So before we get to that, I thought we could just catch up a little bit. I know that we've both been sort of invested in trying to find downtime. And of course, downtime for you means like reading incredibly complex books that
that's so not true. I wish that's who I want to be. That's not actually who I am.
Really? You seem to always be reading the smartest shit.
I start smart books. I don't necessarily finish them. But actually, the book that I did pick up, finally, I think it's very relevant to this week's conversation, though I hope what I say about it isn't stupid because, in case Galina and David are actually listening. But it's George Monbiot's book, Regenesis. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. I'm sure a lot of you have read it. It's a much harder book than I thought it was going to be. And the thing that struck me, particularly since, we're talking about food systems innovations this week, is he talks a lot about complex systems, at least, in the part that I'm reading. I am assured that the book becomes very hopeful. I'm reading the non-hopeful part now. And it's there's a lot of science. I don't want to discourage anybody because, if I can read it, you can read it. But there's the chapter that talks about complex systems. He's talking about the fact that not just the food system, he's applying this idea to the food system, but there are these things called complex systems, which is, it's not just that it's complicated. It's not just that it's got a lot of parts. It's that it's reached a level where it is running itself in a way. There are so many different parts and it's so complex, and that we imagine when we hear about the food system that there are people out there. Well, there are people who understand the food system and they understand how it works. They understand, all the imports and the exports and where things are being grown and all of that. Well, according to him, that's not really true. The system actually becomes so big and so complicated that nobody really understands it. Nobody's running it. It is running itself, and decisions are made with just kind of by the system, if I'm explaining it right. And it's fascinating. It sounds exactly right. Humans think that they make a lot of decisions about things, but actually this is really true of life in general. We just go along with the way things are, and then the way things are become even more complicated, and we just go along with that. And it kind of explains for me how we've gotten into this unbelievable disaster because all of these trillions of animals are caught in this system, and there's nobody to say, well, that's wrong. It's just the system, and it's just the way it is, and it's just the way we all just function within it. Vegans have opted out of the system a little bit, but fundamentally the system is running itself. So I really hope, like I said, I'm told that this book gets very hopeful. So I'm not at that part yet. So I'm hoping that he explains how are we going to shift this if it's so big that nobody really understands it. And he does say that it's also the more organized it gets and the more efficient it gets, actually the more vulnerable it gets, because there are fewer nodes where decisions are made or things shift, places where things shift. And so he thinks that the global food system is, aside from anything that's happening to animals, which he hasn't really discussed yet in the part I've read, he just thinks it's extremely vulnerable that, we think there'll always be all this food, and that's not true. Obviously when you pour climate into this, that makes it like insanely vulnerable. So this week's interview, which has to do with some hopeful views about what can be done to shift the system, I think is very timely.
So, are you a prepper now?
I've always been a prepper.
Yeah, that's true to some extent.
Well, I'm not very efficient about prepping, but I don't get a lot done. It's pretty much like everything else in my life. But at heart, yeah, totally.
Prepper at Heart by Marianne Sullivan. Yeah, I haven't obviously read this.
Disaster looms. Disaster is always looming. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh my gosh. No, it's fine. It's just that you're such a doomist, and it makes me feel like I can't be because you are. Like it makes because we can't both be.
No, enter my world. Enter my world.
So it's interesting because when you talk about that, and again, I haven't read the book. I'm just listening like everybody else is. The first thing I thought of was assimilation and how so many social justice movements assimilate, like the LGBTQ movement. We fought for, same-sex marriage, and we ultimately won for now. And obviously that's a very flawed institution, and it's a flawed institution that we have a right to be in too, but it's a flawed institution nonetheless. And I see the same thing going on with, the veganizing of the world. It is still based in a capitalistic structure that hasn't been recreated or redefined. So it makes me worried that even like the vegan version will have at least some kind of potential of extreme collapse. Because the issue,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But, I'm not sure we can create the perfect world. Let's at least get the animals out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering where you were going with that. That was a great analogy, but I wasn't hearing it at first. I was like, what is she talking about?
That's so funny. You're always a little nervous on my behalf when I go on a rant.
That is not
true.
No,
you should be. I've been babbling and rambling. I feel like I keep forgetting words. Like I was watching this show. It's called Poker Face with Natasha Lyonne. I've only watched the first episode. It's pretty good, but violent. And she kept forgetting words, like very obvious words. And it was like, that's me. And it's like my whole life is words.
That always makes me feel better because when you start forgetting words at my age, you're like, oh shit, what's going on?
Yeah.
It's always reassuring for me to remember, I've always forgotten things. It's not that new.
Yeah. I'm a broadcaster and a writer, and I forget words. I mean, how inconvenient is that? But in any case, I have been also reading. Well, and by reading, I mean listening, because I don't have the capability of reading.
Listening to a book counts. It totally counts.
Okay, well, I just wanted to offer that little caveat that I listen to books constantly. And I'm a big fan of my library app. So I'm constantly downloading them from my library app, which makes me feel very satisfied. Every time I go in a library, I'm like, all of this is free. It's free. I love that so much. God bless the librarians.
I have a lot of trouble listening to books. I have a lot of trouble focusing. So I admire your ability to do that.
So mostly I try and listen to things that have nothing to do with anything. So like, I listen to a lot of YA, and I listen to, just kind of easy novels. So I've recently gotten into this author, Kevin Wilson, and I listened to two of his novels. One is called Now Is Not the Time to Panic, and one is called Nothing to See Here. And I recommend both of them so much. And I recommend the audio version because the actors were just phenomenal. Now I'm listening to another book of his, The Fang Family.
They don't have anything to do with animals, right?
No,
you just liked it. You just liked it.
I did read.
I just want to clarify.
I also was reading, and by reading I mean listening to a very, environmentalist book about and by an incredible Indigenous person, Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin Wall Kimmerer is an Indigenous person. The book is called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's a very well-known book.
Yeah, I read that book.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to get through it.
Well, I was listening to it, and I did have to listen in fits and spurts. And I'm in this DEI book group, and it's not a book group with vegans. And so we go to have the discussion about it. And it's weird. It's like I was sleep deprived or something, because usually I'm very on top of my messaging as a vegan. Like usually I'm very much like, here's what you say, here's what you don't, here's how you say it, here's how you don't. Like, this is how you work a room. It's like my nature to be like that. And I wasn't like that at all. So within the kind of complicated context of discussing an Indigenous person's experiences, I found myself being critical of her like eating animals and like thinking that they gave their lives for us. And I just couldn't have this discussion without having an objection to that, even though I also wanted to make clear that I respect her culture.
Yeah, it's a great book. And she's a botanist, I think a botanist. And whenever she's talking about
Yes,
plants,
botanist.
it's amazing. And I agree. And she doesn't talk
Unbelievable.
about animals a lot, but when she talks about animals, I was uncomfortable.
It's bad, right? Yeah. And so I decided I'm going to read it anyway because there's so much I want to get from this book. And there's so much I got from this book. And I don't know why I went into that discussion.
Because that's who you are. That you're like,
is it? I mean, it is who I am, but it's not who I am to like kind of just be blunt and like not read the room. Like I could have probably done it in a slightly more, massaged way, but now I feel uncomfortable. Like I put myself out there.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fine. Like people already think you're crazy.
That's true. Thank you. All right. So speaking of things that make me uncomfortable, I was talking to someone recently and we realized we both have an ahimsa tattoo. Now I am covered with tattoos. So that is like on my ankle. It's a fairly small tattoo relative to the rest of my tattoos. I got it like probably 20 years ago, if not more, if not longer ago.
Yeah. You've had that tattoo like you had it a long time when I first met you.
Yeah. And so I've had it a very long time. And at the time I got it, I didn't really think much about it. I didn't think critically about certain issues at the time, but I was vegan. So,
well, I think that you could think critically about the fact that you thought that ahimsa was it meant a lot to you, that concept of peace and nonviolence.
Right.
Like, I'm sure you thought deeply about that. But there was something else that I think is bothering you now that you didn't think as much about.
Well, I have been thinking a lot. I think a lot about misappropriation and appropriation and where the line is between appropriation and misappropriation. And when, quite frankly, when our society is making too big of a deal about shared cultural experiences and borrowing from this culture for that culture, which is very common to do, and whether or not we're just becoming like too hypervigilant about that discussion. But then I also recognize that sometimes there is genuine misappropriation that is really inappropriate. And so how do you find the balance? And so I have been accused of having participated in cultural misappropriation by having this Sanskrit tattoo. And so since that happened a few years ago, I've been thinking I'm going to get that covered. I haven't yet because I only get tattoos sometimes. And usually when I get one, I have a really great idea for one and I'm not necessarily going to go cover one. So someone else had it and that person's also vegan. And I asked them if they've ever had this discussion with anyone else or with themselves. And they said that and they're also white, like me, and they said that they absolutely do not think it's misappropriation because they're vegan and it's everything they stand by and live by. And I was like, yeah, me too. And then suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, like where do I stand on this issue? And so I wanted to know what you thought, since you're the master of all opinions.
That's a frightening thought. I don't know. I think it depends. Obviously, as you said earlier, cultures mix.